So when it comes to true property ownership rights, it's always at the most local level, right? And I can confidently say that because it's really our township and our trustees who make a lot of these ordinances, but the same token, they have to abide by, state legislation. So, for example, like what works, in metro, in a metro city like our Flint or our Detroit might not necessarily work in rural America, like here in, rural township, or our Napoleon townships, which are very, very rural. And so it has to make sense, right? So it can't be a one-fits-all kind of sizing. But I would definitely say, obviously I'm in favor of the less government, the better.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. For most people, owning a home is part of the American dream. It's something folks look forward to for years. But when the average age of a first-time home buyer is now in their 40s, that's a pretty good sign something isn't quite right with the housing market. Today, we're going to talk about one of the housing challenges a realtor is seeing in her area. And it might not be the issue you'd expect. I want to welcome Anna Louise, a Michigan realtor, to the podcast. Anna, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me here today. Appreciate it.
Great. Yeah. Well, hey, so just to start out with, you're a realtor, but you didn't start out in real estate. Tell us a little bit about what you did before and how you got involved in real estate.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in banking. So both my husband and I, we were both bankers. My husband was an executive, and he retired about 2012. And at the time, his last bank job was in the Tawas area. And, he was too young to retire. So one of his great mentors who was on the board of the bank said, "Hey, Tim, you should get involved in real estate." And gosh, that was 14 years ago. And there was a season where his business just exploded and he needed a part-time assistant. And at the time, I was running community branches for a local bank. And I didn't really know what his workday looked like. So I had taken off some time from work and, hey, I'll just shadow you for a week and see what you do. And the week ended, he had like 91 different applicants for this part-time assistant job. And it was my role to go through it for him so he can focus on his clients and his sellers and buyers. And I'm like, "Hey, Tim, I think I can do this role, but I'm going to have to give up my banking career to make it happen." And that was back, that was 9 years ago. And so we've been hitting the ground ever since. And we say if what we know now, what we would have known then, we would have done this years ago.
Oh, that's good. Not all of us have that realization. Well, talk to me about the areas of real estate that you work in. I mean, both geographically, like where you're located, but also are there different types of real estate that you're involved in?
Yeah, that's a great question, David, because we do have a niche in our market. So we do have a team. We're with the Tim Creech team. That's my husband, Tim Creech, and we're with 5-star real estate leaders. And 5-star is one of, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest independent brokerage in the state of Michigan. We have over 900 agents. We're also now in Florida. But our wheelhouse and our comfort zone is really in the Southeast. So we know Jackson County really well, Lenawee, Hillsdale, parts of Washtenaw, which is where the University of Michigan is located, just for reference. And we also go into Calhoun counties. But if you're familiar with our area, we are very rural. Like our town has 2 stoplights. That's how rural we are. But we're also known as the Irish Hills. So it's a resort, vacation, lake home, destination is where our main headquarters is located. And so we are very skilled at vacant land, lake houses, trust, and estates as well.
Great. Well, Well, it's a nice part of the country. If people haven't spent a lot of time in Michigan, Michigan's a really beautiful state. I don't think it gets the credit it deserves. It's 2 coastlines and
Oh, it's beautiful.
really just and then internally, it's really beautiful.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally not from Michigan. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska. I went to school in Michigan and I never left. And yeah, between all the coastlines, our beautiful farmland, and then on the East Coast we have, our big city of Detroit. So you really get the best of all worlds here in Michigan.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned lake houses. I mean, I know I've been to a number of lake house vacations in Michigan, and there's just some beautiful areas throughout the state. So I think I don't know, it's a big state that a lot of people know, but I don't think everybody really realizes how all that it has to offer. But so you've started seeing though some challenges with regard to zoning, and we've talked about on the show. We've talked to a few different guests about the role of government and kind of the barriers that government puts up to people realizing their dreams and building their business or sometimes building their dream home. So when did you start seeing zoning issues zoning laws become more of an issue, and maybe talk about the differences between different townships?
So David, that's a really heavy question. And a very loaded one. And I could probably talk for days on the topic. So I know we have limited time. But I would say, our team we really started to see a difference when we were involved in a couple of different projects. It was 2 different lakes, 2 different counties, 2 different years. And both of the investors, 2 different investors, both wanted to invest in our area for retirement living homes, but not like a senior center, but more of, aging gracefully in place with a smaller housing units built around, planned neighborhood with a restaurant, just really forward-thinking ideas. And both the townships in 2 different counties shut it down completely. And they had different avenues of how that went about. But that to us was like, okay, a couple different red flags had gone on. And plus with the spike in the housing crisis during COVID, which I often say that pandemic really pushed forward a lot of home sales that should have happened in the future, all happened right like in May of 2020. And it did not really slow down until 2022. But after that season, we started seeing more and more families try to purchase property as one, but to have what we call in our fields an ADU, which is alternative dwelling unit, just to see how that could help them with their living situation. And that again has gone up into different roadblocks here in different townships. So I would say those 2 moments. So the one with our investors, who were both shot down, and then in the last 3 years, seeing more and more multi-generations trying to buy property as one family has been a challenge.
So what are the local governments objecting to specifically?
Well, unfortunately, they're all very different. So Michigan, I don't have the exact quote on this, and, please fact check me, but Michigan as a state as a whole is probably one of the most complicated states when it comes to municipalities and townships. We have so many what we call little kingdoms. Like, for example, where we are in Brooklyn, Michigan, in about a 10-mile radius, we probably have 8 different municipalities that touch our townships. That's how many that we have. We have hundreds. I mean, it's almost like a burden to remember all the ordinances, all the zoning, and they're all so different, right? So, like, for example, we have one township locally that you can't split a property or parcel if it's less than 10 acres. but we have one we have one we have one township that you can't split property unless it's more than 40 acres. So those are different, ordinances that's, may have made sense, let's just say 40, 50 years ago, but really do not make sense here in the 21st century, which is why I know I'm excited about the 21st Century Road to Housing Act that was just passed last Thursday, and the 21st Century Home Act that got a 390-9 vote. So it's as bipartisan as it gets. But that's just a little example of some of the setbacks that we have where, not everyone now wants 10-acre parcels or 40-acre parcels. They want to have the right to split them off and sell them so that way their neighbors and friends can start building houses that they can afford to live on.
Well, so you mentioned some of the legislation that's been moving there at the state level in Michigan. Can you maybe tell us what you know about that and what you think the future is with regard to that legislation and why you think it's necessary?
Yeah. Number one, so the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, that was just passed Thursday with an 89-10 vote. So it's also, which is great, fantastic. I personally don't think we're going to see a lot of momentum up front just because, it's not just the zoning and the ordinances that have to be, looked at and examined, but it's also our health department regulations and our lending practices that all kind of fall into the similar, spokeswheel, I would say, of what's causing this bottleneck of new homes or availability of homes. So I'm excited that it's a groundwork, but I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us in the next 5 to 10 years just to see some real results in action.
Yeah. So what? So we're I guess would you like to see reform more at the state level or at the local level, or is there a combination there that would get us to a better place so that you think there'd be it would open up the housing market more?
Yeah, I would definitely say both. So when it comes to true property ownership rights, it's always at the most local level, right? And I can confidently say that because it's really our township and our trustees who make a lot of these ordinances, but at the same token, they have to abide by, state legislation. So, for example, what works, in metro, in a metro city like our Flint or our Detroit might not necessarily work in rural America, like here in, rural township, or our Napoleon townships, which are very, very rural. And so it has to make sense, right? So it can't be a one fits all kind of sizing. But I would definitely say, obviously I'm in favor of the less government, the better. But we do have to bring some common sense practices back to the state, which then funnels down to our townships. But I do know that with the 21st Century Home Act that was passed in Congress at the federal level, that looks like, trying to read through the bill, that looks like it's going to put pressure from the Fed onto the state. And then the state will put pressure on the townships to see, how they're going to make some changes. So that way federal grants and money can filter down, which will be, a win-win for everyone.
Anna, how did you get involved in kind of advancing state legislation and advocating for it? I mean, there's a lot of realtors in Michigan, and I'm sure the vast majority aren't involved in advocating for reform. So how did you get involved?
Yeah, great question. So by default, one of my best friends, her name is Billy. She works alongside Tim Golding at the state level with AFP.
Yeah.
And, I've always been fascinated with government and policy. And my husband and I, we really aren't bystanders. We love to stay informed. And honestly, we have more of an economic mindset when we help our sellers and buyers. So it's just natural for us to always stay on top of what's going on with the federal, state, and we often say everything goes back to economics. And so with that, you have to be involved in understanding, how our policies work. Plus, my husband is involved with our local school district. He is president of our school district on the school board, and so
Yeah.
it's just very organic for us to just be involved. I spent a couple years on a sub board for our village for our village of Brooklyn, which was a corridor improvement authority to help boost our business and our just in our story about the village of Brooklyn. But it's just a natural way for us that we're involved.
Yeah, like I said, not we have a campaign that America's Prosperity is doing across the country called the One Small Step campaign. And as I talk to folks across the country, I'm trying to understand like what caused you to take that step to get involved, because that's so consequential for the future of our country. It might be impacting your community, your state, nationally, and when we look back throughout American history, everybody took one small step, even George Washington, or John Adams or whatever. So it's just fascinating because everybody has a story of what got them involved.
Yeah, and I don't take the right, to vote very lightly. So when I was younger, my father worked international sales, so we lived several years overseas, and just the ability to vote in a democratic election, it's just mind blowing that a lot of the world does not get that privilege. And so I got to volunteer for our 2020 presidential elections with the voting polls, and that was such a great experience. And you really can't force volunteerism, but I really wish every American could experience that, because I think it would help them understand like the sense of urgency of why your vote, still and it does matter. But yeah, and plus, with our business, we get to mingle and talk with people like all day long. And we come across such amazing like stories of like triumph, the American dream, or, not all sales are happy and positive, so sometimes it's because of a death or divorce or job loss. And we get to really understand our clients' way of life, and being involved across the board of so many different aspects. How do you not want to get involved to make their lives better?
Yeah, I love the formula that you're kind of using here, where you are interested in being involved. You have a kind of a citizen's mindset where, I'm going to make my community, my country better. But like you're pursuing something right now where you have real knowledge. We don't have to be an expert in something to get involved. Absolutely not. We need people involved all over the place. But you have particular knowledge in real estate and how government's interaction with and the zoning laws are really impacting people's housing options.
Oh, yeah.
So I applaud you for kind of finding that space to go into. Let me ask you, do you want to get more involved in the public policy process and in politics, or are you kind of happy with where you're at right now?
I don't know. I always say God has a calling, so I have a career and a calling. I don't know if that's a calling for me.
So,
but hey, if the Lord puts me right in that path, I have to listen. But no, I know between our schedules and what we have, our commitments, we are pretty full. But hey, I'd be open to seeing how it could be a win-win for us and for our community. Yeah.
If you could wave the wand, the magic policy wand,
Okay.
In Michigan at the state and local level, what would the housing kind of regulatory regimen look like? And how do you think it would affect housing options in the state?
Yeah. So, oh man, if I could have a magic wand, that would be amazing. I would relook at a few different things. So, the cost of our permits. I'll give you an example. So, when a house cannot get on public water, right? And so we have to tap into maybe like a sewer line, but they're still on a well. I just talked to one of our builders a couple weeks ago, and his latest new build in a township, it was on a well, but they have to tap into a public sewer, that tap cost just to get into it was a little over $12,000 from the local municipality. And they're the ones that
Oh, wow.
set the rate on that. Yeah. So 12,000, right? And these fees keep increasing year over year over year for our builders, which get passed on to the buyers. So that's just one. Or here in Michigan, we have in our areas we have pockets of high radon, which is an odorless. It's a colorless gas. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States. But there is a mandate that for every new build or reconstruction, you have to install a passive radon system, which, that's not too bad compared to like the sewer tap-in cost. Because that could run a homeowner between $500 to, $1,800, and it depends on the build of the house. But a passive radon system is just that. It's very passive. There's no motor, or there's no tool that's equipped to actually suck the radon out. The system is just relying on the natural wind coming across the open pipe to suck the radon out of the house, which, to me, that's just a waste of money and time and inspection fees, really. But the biggest one I see that to me is a little more scary because it involves our energy company and some of our health department regulations, is we now have certain areas in Michigan that if you have a new build, so new construction or a remodel, you cannot put in a natural gas appliance, and that includes a furnace. So yes, absolutely. So these appliances, including our furnaces, are electric based. And I'll tell you, it seems like our weather gets worse and worse in Michigan, where, in January, we had 9 straight days of like 20 or below temps. I think we had a week worth of like, it was in the negatives. And I can't imagine having to run that on the electrical grid, which also means that we're seeing more and more solar panels coming into Michigan. So more and more of our farmland is being taken up. So that's how like those are just all kind of interlocked with one another.
Mm-hmm.
That like those zoning, really affects a lot of different areas in our state.
Yeah, well, that's a scary prospect of being dependent on electricity, because we've done a number of episodes talking to folks who where the electrical grid is already taxed. So should data centers come online and just the cloud in general, it's there's not an abundance of electrical energy out there. So that'd be scary for your home's heating to be dependent upon that, especially when it's crunch time in the winter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so those are examples where when it comes to our new builds, there's just so many different regulations. Even the size of homes, which doesn't affect just our zoning, but it affects like our lending policies too, on the federal level. So like, for example, I own a lake house at one of our local lakes, and I love it. It's a 2-bedroom, it's a cottage, but that home could not be built in 2026 because it goes against our current code, zoning ordinance, and lending practices because of the square footage. The main house itself is only 725 square feet. And so by the current code and lending, a 2-bedroom house has to be a minimum of 850 square feet. Now, I understand both sides, but as the American family or the American individual is changing, the idea of these, McMansions of the 90s, where you have 4,000 square feet, of living space, that is really not what an average buyer who is now 40, who is a millennial. Very rarely do we see someone who is millennial or younger wanting a 4,000 plus.
Yeah.
5-bedroom, 5-bath square house. It's not part of their culture or how they want to live.
Well, I think certainly, the market needs to, and the regulatory regimen that governs the market does need to reflect, what consumers want and what, so that we can keep having a vital housing market. I mean, too many people are kind of left behind right now, not being able to,
Mhm.
afford their first home. And that really, I think for a lot of us has always been a kind of an essential cornerstone of the American dream. So I'm hopeful that these reforms in Michigan will take hold and be successful. And then, I know that we're working as a company at Americans for Prosperity to try to replicate
Yeah.
a lot of these housing reforms throughout the nation, because it's important. People, especially young people, really care about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's because we see where, someone who is a, um, born in their 50s, it's not that they don't want to sell their home. It's just those people also don't have a place where they can go to, safely age in. So it's not just, our 40-year-old buyers, it's everyone. It's also our 75-year-old sellers. So it's full circle.
Well, and I appreciate the hard work that you're doing out there. And I really appreciate you joining us to talk about this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And thank you for the work that AFP is doing, not just in Michigan, but all across our country.
Love doing it. Hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.